For nearly 2 years, the hospital had become the center of Elena Voss's world. Before the pandemic, she had a routine like everyone else. She worked her scheduled shifts, came home in time for dinner, and spent weekends with her younger brother and her aging mother. Life was not perfect, but it was steady, predictable. She could count on little things: morning coffee at the kitchen table, laughter during family meals, and quiet evenings where she could finally let her shoulders relax. Then the world changed. At first, it came as distant news reports and worried conversations in hospital hallways. A strange illness spreading quickly, hospitals overseas filling beyond capacity, doctors warning that it was only a matter of time before it reached them in full force. And when it did, nothing was ever the same again. The hospital transformed almost overnight. Hallways once filled with ordinary movement became crowded with urgency. Every shift felt heavier than the last. Protective gear became second skin. Faces disappeared behind masks and shields. Time itself seemed to blur. Elena adapted the only way she knew how, by working. She took extra shifts when others called in sick. She stayed late when departments were short-staffed. She volunteered in units most avoided because she knew every pair of hands mattered. Her co-workers often joked that she was running on some invisible battery no one else had. But the truth was simpler. She didn't know how to stop. If she slowed down, even for a moment, she feared the exhaustion would catch her. The grief would catch her. Everything she had pushed aside would rise to the surface. So she kept moving. At 34, Elena had become one of the most dependable nurses in the building. Patients remembered her because she spoke gently, even when the room was full of tension. Families trusted her because she never rushed through explanations. Doctors respected her because she stayed calm in situations where others lost their footing. What no one saw was how much it cost her. She had not spent a full day off in months. Her apartment was little more than a place to shower and sleep. The fridge was mostly empty except for bottled water and leftovers she rarely touched. Laundry piled in corners until she had enough energy to deal with it. Her mother called often, but Elena usually answered with the same line. "I'm okay. Just busy." She always sounded steady, and her mother believed her. But Elena was not okay. She was surviving. One rainy Tuesday in late autumn, she stood in the break room at 2:17 a.m., staring at a vending machine as if it might somehow solve all her problems. She had not eaten since noon. Her body ached in ways she no longer bothered to describe. The straps of her protective mask had left deep marks along her cheeks. Her hands were dry from constant washing. Her eyes felt heavy enough to close standing up. She inserted coins and pressed the button for crackers. Nothing happened. She pressed again. Still nothing. For a moment, she simply stared. Then, unexpectedly, she laughed. It was soft at first, then louder than she intended. One of the other nurses, standing near the coffee machine, looked over. "You okay there?" Elena shook her head, still smiling in disbelief. "I think I just lost a battle to a vending machine." The other nurse chuckled. "That machine's undefeated." For a brief second, the room felt normal. Human. Like life before endless shifts and constant alarms. But the moment disappeared as quickly as it came. Her pager buzzed. Room 417. She straightened, adjusted her mask, and headed back into the hallway. That was how it always went. Small moments of relief, immediately swallowed by responsibility. Room 417 held an elderly woman who had been admitted 3 days earlier. She was frightened, confused, and struggling more with loneliness than illness. Elena entered quietly. The woman looked up. "Oh good," she whispered. "It's you." Elena moved closer. "How are we feeling tonight?" "Tired," the woman admitted. "And scared." Elena pulled a chair beside the bed. For the next 15 minutes, she sat with her, listening. Not rushing. Not glancing at the clock. Just listening. The woman talked about her grandchildren. About the garden she missed. About how she had not been hugged in weeks. When tears filled her eyes, Elena reached for her hand. "You're not alone tonight," she said softly. The woman squeezed back. "Neither are you." Those words stayed with Elena long after she left the room. because no one had asked her how she was in a very long time. By sunrise, she had already forgotten what day it was. She signed off patient charts, handed updates to the morning team, and finally removed her protective gear. The sunlight outside was pale and cold. She stood in the parking lot for a full minute, too tired to move. Rainwater glistened across the pavement. Her car sat under a flickering lamp, covered in leaves she had not noticed collecting. She climbed inside and rested her forehead against the steering wheel. Just for a second, she told herself. But the second turned into 10 minutes. When her phone rang, she nearly jumped. It was her brother, Adrian. She answered immediately. "Did I wake you?" "You never wake me," he said. "Because you're always awake before me." She smiled faintly. "Fair point." He hesitated. "Mom's worried." Elena closed her eyes. "She always worries. Not like this." Silence stretched between them. "She says you sound different." Elena looked out at the empty lot. "I'm fine." Adrian exhaled softly. "That's exactly what she says people tell her when they're not fine." She wanted to argue. Instead, she rubbed her temples. "I just need sleep. Come by this weekend." "I'll try." "You said that last weekend." "I know." Another silence. Then Adrian said quietly, "We miss you." The words hit harder than she expected. She swallowed. "I miss you too." After the call ended, she sat there a little longer. Then she drove home through streets that felt unfamiliar in daylight. At her apartment, she left her shoes by the door and collapsed onto the couch without even changing. The silence in the room was overwhelming. No monitors, no voices, no alarms, just stillness. For a while, she stared at the ceiling. She should have felt relieved. Instead, she felt restless, as if her body no longer understood how to exist without constant urgency. She eventually fell asleep with the television on, though she never remembered turning it on. Hours later, she woke to darkness. Her neck hurt. Her phone showed 6 missed calls from the hospital. She stared at the screen. For one reckless second, she considered ignoring it. But habit won. She called back. A staffing shortage. Could she come in early? She said yes before thinking, because that was what she always did. Before leaving, she glanced at herself in the mirror. She barely recognized the woman staring back. Her face looked older, tired in ways makeup could never hide. Her eyes held something distant. She touched the edge of the sink and whispered, "Just keep going." Then she left. By the time she returned to the hospital that evening, the lobby buzzed with controlled chaos. Stretchers moved quickly. Staff exchanged updates in clipped tones. And Elena stepped back into the rhythm as if she had never left. She greeted coworkers, checked assignments, and moved toward her station. No hesitation, no complaint, because this was what she knew, what she had become. As she reviewed patient charts, one of the doctors approached. "You should take a lighter load tonight." She looked up. "Why?" "Because you've worked 12 days straight." She blinked. "Has it really been 12? 13, actually." Elena gave a tired smile. "I'm still standing." The doctor studied her carefully. "That doesn't mean you should have to." She looked back at the charts. "People need care. And you need rest." But Elena simply picked up her clipboard and headed down the hall. Because rest felt like something for later. For someday. Not now. Not while the world still needed hands like hers. She moved room to room, doing what she always did. Steady voice, careful attention, calm presence. To every patient she was composed, reliable, unshaken. No one saw how deeply exhausted she really was. No one knew how close she was to breaking. And even Elena herself did not realize that one ordinary shift, one patient, one conversation, would soon force her to confront everything she had buried inside. But for now, she just kept walking down the hospital corridor, unaware that her life was about to change in a way she could never predict. The evening shift began the way most of them did. Too fast, too loud, and already behind schedule before the first hour had passed. Elena barely had time to sip the coffee she had grabbed from the cafeteria before she was called to assist with an intake on the 4th floor. The elevators were crowded, so she took the stairs, moving with the same practiced urgency that had become second nature. By the time she reached the admissions wing, her coffee had gone cold in her hand. A clerk at the desk pointed her toward room 426. New arrival. No family listed. Came in alone. Elena nodded and entered without another thought. The room was dimly lit. The overhead lights softened for comfort. Sitting upright in the bed was an older man, perhaps in his late 70s. His posture was straight despite the fatigue in his face. He wore the standard hospital gown, but something about him did not fit the fragile image of most patients his age. He looked alert, not anxious, not confused, just observant. His silver hair was neatly combed back, and his eyes followed Elena the moment she stepped inside. She gave her usual calm smile. "Good evening. I'm Elena. I'll be helping care for you tonight." He studied her for a second before answering. "Good evening, Nurse Elena." His voice was steady and deep, with the kind of quiet confidence that made people naturally listen. She checked his chart. Mild respiratory concerns, fatigue, elevated blood pressure. Stable overall. Nothing alarming. "How are you feeling?" "Like a man who has spent too many years ignoring his doctor." She smiled faintly. "At least you came in eventually." "Yes," he said, still watching her. "Eventually." She began the routine questions, checking vitals and updating his information. He answered politely, but his gaze never wandered. Most patients either talked too much or withdrew into silence. This man did neither. He seemed to be observing her more than the room. After a while, Elena asked, "Do you have someone we should contact for you?" "No." She looked up. "No family?" "Not anymore." The way he said it made her stop for a second. There was no bitterness in his voice, just fact. She noted it in the chart. "Well, we'll take good care of you." "I believe that." There was a pause. Then he added, "You already do." She assumed he meant the hospital staff in general. Still, something about the sentence lingered. She finished her checks and moved toward the door. "I'll return later to see how you're doing." "Before you go," he said. She turned. "Have we met before?" The question caught her off guard. She studied him again, searching her memory. "No, I don't think so." He gave the smallest nod, as if confirming something to himself. "Interesting." Elena waited for an explanation, but none came. Instead, he leaned back against the pillow and closed his eyes. She left the room with a strange feeling she could not explain. By midnight, the floor had grown quieter. Not calm, hospitals were never truly calm, but quieter. Elena checked on patients, updated notes, and handled medication rounds. Still, she found herself thinking about the man in 426. There was something familiar in the way he spoke, though she was certain they had never met. At 12:37 a.m., she returned to his room. He was awake. "I was beginning to think you'd forgotten me," he said. Elena adjusted his foreline. "You seem difficult to forget." That earned the faintest smile. "How am I doing?" "Your numbers look better." "And your numbers?" She paused. "My what?" "Your energy, your sleep, your state of mind." She let out a soft breath. "Those aren't usually on the chart. Perhaps they should be." She gave him a professional smile, the kind she used to redirect personal questions. "I'm doing fine." He looked at her carefully. "That answer has become a shield for you." Elena stopped moving. For a moment, she thought she had misheard, but his expression remained calm. She forced a light tone. "You sound like a therapist." "No," he said. "Just someone who notices things." She continued adjusting equipment, though slower now. "Well, I appreciate the concern." "You shouldn't." That made her turn. "Excuse me?" He met her eyes directly. "You shouldn't appreciate concern so quickly, especially when you've spent so long pretending not to need it." The room seemed to grow still. Elena felt something shift in her chest, an uncomfortable tightening. She straightened. "Sir, I think you should rest." But he continued. "You've been carrying more than your share for a long time." Her voice sharpened slightly. "You don't know me." "No," he said quietly. But I know what it looks like when someone is surviving instead of living. The words landed harder than they should have, because they were too close to the truth. She stepped back. This conversation is inappropriate. Perhaps, he admitted, but necessary. Elena glanced toward the door, ready to leave. Then he said the sentence that stopped her completely. You were never meant to disappear into duty the way your father did. Her entire body froze. She turned slowly. The room felt colder. Her father. No one at the hospital knew about him. She rarely spoke of him at all. He had died when she was young, and the details were deeply personal. How do you know that? She asked. Her voice was low now, careful. The man held her gaze. Because I knew him. She stared, waiting for the slightest sign of dishonesty. There was none. That's impossible. It isn't. She stepped closer. Tell me his name. He answered without hesitation. A name she had not heard spoken by a stranger in over 20 years. The sound of it knocked the breath from her. She gripped the side rail of the bed. Who are you? The man looked tired suddenly. Not physically, emotionally. Someone who owes your family an explanation. Her mind raced. This had to be some coincidence. Some elaborate misunderstanding. But there were too many specifics. Too much certainty. She searched his face, looking for familiarity. Nothing. And yet his words felt anchored in something real. I need you to leave this alone for tonight, he said gently. No. She shook her head. You don't get to say something like that and then ask me to wait. You're exhausted. That has nothing to do with this. It has everything to do with this. His tone was calm, but firm. Truth requires steadiness. And tonight you're running on fumes. Elena stared at him, anger mixing with confusion. Tell me now. He looked toward the window for a moment, then back at her. Come tomorrow morning. Off shift. Not as a nurse. She hesitated. Why? Because what I have to tell you belongs to you, not to the person in scrubs who gives everything away. The sentence unsettled her more than anything else. He reached into the drawer beside the bed and placed a small folded card on the table. Read this when you leave. She did not touch it. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. Finally, Elena turned and walked out. The hallway lights seemed harsher now. She moved on instinct, finishing the rest of her shift, but her thoughts were nowhere near the tasks in front of her. Every time she tried to focus, his words returned. You were never meant to disappear into duty the way your father did. By sunrise, her hands trembled as she removed her gloves. She had not looked at the card. Not once. It remained in her pocket, heavy as stone. In the parking lot, she finally unfolded it. There was only one sentence written inside. He kept his promise. I'm here to keep mine. No signature. No explanation. Just those words. Elena read them 3 times. Her father had made promises before he died. At least that was what her mother always said. But she had never known the details. She stood beside her car as morning traffic moved in the distance. Rain clouds gathered overhead. For the first time in years, she felt something stronger than exhaustion. She felt shaken and deeply curious. Who was that man? How had he known so much? And what promise was he talking about? She drove home, but sleep never came. Instead, she sat at her kitchen table with the card in front of her, replaying every second of the conversation. By noon, she had made her decision. She would go back, not because she trusted him, but because she needed answers. And somewhere beneath the confusion, she sensed that this meeting was not random, that the endless months of routine and survival had somehow led her to this exact moment. She looked at the clock. 2 hours until visiting restrictions eased. For the first time in a long while, Elena was not thinking about her next shift. She was thinking about her past, and the man waiting in room 426, who had just turned her carefully ordered world upside down. Elena returned to the hospital that afternoon wearing jeans, a gray sweater, and a long coat she had not used in months. It felt strange to enter through the front doors without scrubs, badge, or the pressure of a shift waiting for her. For once, she was not there to check charts or answer call lights. She was there for herself. That thought alone felt unfamiliar. The lobby was quieter than usual, though the air still carried the same mix of urgency and routine. Staff moved with purpose. Visitors sat in spaced-out chairs, holding coffee cups and worry in equal measure. Elena headed to the 4th floor. Every step toward room 426 tightened something in her chest. She had spent the morning trying to reason with herself. Maybe the man had somehow found public records. Maybe he had confused her with someone else. Maybe her exhaustion had made the conversation feel bigger than it was. But none of those explanations truly fit. When she reached the room, the door was slightly open. He was awake, sitting upright as before. This time he smiled faintly. "You came. I said I would." She closed the door behind her. "I'm not here as your nurse." "I know." Elena remained standing. "Start talking." He gestured toward the chair. "You may want to sit." "I'd rather stand." He studied her for a moment, then nodded. "My name is Theodore Vale." The name meant nothing to her. "I served with your father in a medical outreach unit many years ago." Elena frowned. "My father wasn't military." "No," Theodore said. "He was a volunteer physician, civilian status. But he worked alongside us during an international health mission." That caught her attention. Her father had always been described as a doctor who traveled for humanitarian work before settling down. But details had always been vague. Her mother rarely spoke about those years. "You knew him there?" "I did." Elena crossed her arms. "Then tell me why I've never heard your name." A shadow passed across Theodore's face. "Because after what happened, I stayed away." The answer unsettled her. "What happened?" He looked down briefly, as if choosing his words carefully. "There was an outbreak in a remote region where our team had been stationed. Resources were scarce. The situation worsened quickly. Your father took on more responsibility than anyone should have." Elena listened without interrupting. "He worked without rest, treated patients day and night, refused to leave when evacuation was offered." A familiar image formed in her mind, someone burying themselves in duty, just as she had. "One evening," Theodore continued, "conditions deteriorated further. Supplies ran critically low. A decision had to be made about who would be moved first when transport finally arrived." Elena's throat tightened. "He chose others over himself." Theodore nodded. "He insisted families and the most vulnerable be sent first. He stayed behind with a reduced team to continue care." "That sounds like him." "Yes." Silence settled. Then Theodore said quietly, "I was among those evacuated." Elena looked at him sharply. "And he wasn't?" "No." The room felt smaller. "What happened after?" Theodore's expression grew distant. "He did not survive the final weeks of the outbreak." Elena had known her father died overseas, but hearing it laid out in such human detail was different. Painfully real. She swallowed hard. "And you disappeared." It was not a question. Theodore accepted it. "Yes." "Why?" "Because I could not face what his sacrifice had cost." Elena's voice cooled. "My mother raised 2 children alone." "I know." "You stayed silent while she carried that." "I know." The simplicity of his answer only deepened her anger. She stepped closer. "Then why come now?" He reached into the bedside drawer and removed a worn leather folder. "Because I recently learned I do not have much time left. And because your father made me promise something." He handed her the folder. She hesitated, then took it. Inside were documents, photographs, and an envelope sealed with age. On top was a picture of her father, young, smiling, standing beside Theodore and several others in medical gear. Elena stared at it. It was the first candid image she had ever seen of him. Not a family portrait. Not a formal picture. A real moment. She touched the edge carefully. "He asked me that if I survived, I would one day find his family and deliver this." Theodore nodded toward the sealed envelope. "With my own explanation." Her hands trembled slightly as she opened it. Inside was a handwritten letter. The first line alone stole her breath. "If this reaches you, Then fate allowed another path than the one I hoped for. She sank into the chair without meaning to. Her father's words unfolded across the page. Steady, thoughtful, deeply personal. He wrote about duty, about choosing service even when it demanded too much. He wrote about his fear that his children might one day inherit his habit of carrying every burden alone. And then he wrote a sentence that pierced her completely. If my daughter becomes someone who forgets her own life while caring for others, remind her that compassion must include herself. Tears blurred the words. Elena lowered the letter. For a moment, she could not speak. Theodore watched quietly. He spoke of you often, he said. She was little then, but stubborn, kind, always watching everything. Elena laughed softly through tears. That sounds accurate. He worried most about what example he was leaving. She looked back at the letter. He knew. Yes. The realization settled heavily. Her father had seen in himself the same pattern she now lived, and he had tried even from afar to interrupt it. She wiped her eyes. What else is in here? Theodore pointed to the documents. Scholarship records, trust papers, financial statements. Elena scanned them, confused. These can't be right. They are. Her father had arranged, through Theodore and others, a long-term educational trust for his children, one that had grown over decades. It had remained untouched because no one had successfully located the family after a relocation and administrative errors. Until recently, Elena looked up. This could have changed everything for us. I know. Theodore's voice carried regret. It should have reached you years ago. She sat in stunned silence. Her mother had worked double shifts as a school secretary. Adrian had delayed university because of finances. And all along something had been waiting, unclaimed, forgotten, because of a broken promise. Or at least a delayed one. Anger flickered again, but it was tangled now with understanding. Life had not been simple. People failed, even with good intentions. Theodore leaned back, visibly tired. I cannot undo the years, but I can give you what was always yours. Elena closed the folder. Why tell me this now, personally? Because your father's real message was never about the money. She met his gaze. It was about the life you are living. She said nothing. You are walking the same path he did. Giving until nothing remains. That's my job. No, Theodore said gently. That is your choice. And it is consuming you. She looked away. He continued. He believed service mattered deeply. But he also believed losing yourself to it was a tragedy. The words struck because they echoed everything she had refused to examine. The endless shifts, the empty apartment, the family she barely saw, the life reduced to obligation. She whispered almost to herself, I thought if I kept going, it would be enough. For whom? She had no answer. For patience? For guilt? For fear of slowing down? Perhaps all of it. Theodore let the silence breathe. Finally, Elena stood. She held the folder close. I don't know what to do with this. You begin by telling your family the truth. And after that? He smiled faintly. You decide whether you want to survive your life, or actually live it. She looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. As she turned toward the door, he spoke once more. Elena. She paused. Your father would have been proud of the nurse you became. Her throat tightened. But even prouder of the person you still have time to become. She left the room carrying more than documents. She carried a reopened past, a promise delivered too late, and a question she could no longer ignore. For the first time in years, the future did not feel like another endless hallway of responsibility. Felt uncertain, and strangely open. But before she could step into that future, she had to face the family who had lived all these years without knowing the full truth. And she knew that conversation would change everything just as deeply as Theodore's words had. Elena drove to her mother's house that evening with the leather folder resting on the passenger seat beside her. She had not visited in person for nearly 6 weeks. That realization sat heavily with her. The drive felt longer than usual, though every turn was familiar. The neighborhoods grew quieter as she moved farther from the city center. until she reached the modest brick home where she and her brother had grown up. The porch light was already on. Her mother must have been watching for her. When Elena stepped out of the car, the front door opened almost immediately. Her mother stood there in a soft cardigan, her silver-streaked hair tied back loosely. She looked relieved and worried at the same time. "You actually came." Elena gave a tired smile. "I said I would. You say many things." The words carried no anger, only truth. Elena stepped forward and hugged her. Her mother stiffened in surprise for a second, then wrapped her arms around her daughter. It had been far too long. Inside, the house smelled of soup and fresh bread. For a moment, Elena felt as if she had stepped backward in time. Adrian was in the kitchen, setting bowls on the table. When he saw her, he grinned. "Well, look who remembered she has a family." She laughed softly. "I deserve that." "You do." But he crossed the room and hugged her anyway. The warmth of it nearly broke her. They sat at the table together, and for the first time in months, Elena ate a meal that had not come from a cafeteria tray or vending machine. Conversation stayed light at first. Her mother asked about work. Adrian talked about his new project. Ordinary things. But the folder on Elena's lap felt heavier by the minute. Eventually, she placed her spoon down. "There's something I need to tell you." Both of them looked at her. Her mother's expression shifted immediately. "What is it?" Elena took a breath. "Today I met someone at the hospital." She told them everything. About Theodore. About the medical mission. About her father's final promise. About the trust. And finally about the letter. She placed the worn envelope on the table. No one spoke as her mother unfolded it. Elena watched her read. At first, her mother's face remained still. Then her hand moved to cover her mouth. Tears gathered silently. Adrian leaned closer, reading over her shoulder. When they reached the sentence about compassion including oneself, he looked at Elena. For once, he had no joke ready. Only understanding. Her mother read the entire letter twice before folding it carefully. "He wrote this for us." Elena nodded. "For all of us." Her mother touched the page like it was something sacred. "I spent years wondering if he was afraid in the end." "He wasn't," Elena said. "At least not for himself." That answer made her mother cry openly. Not the quiet tears of grief, but something deeper, release. As if a question she had carried for decades had finally been answered. Adrian took the trust papers next. He read through them slowly, disbelief growing across his face. "This is real." "Yes." He shook his head. "All those years." "I know." Elena felt the same ache. Not because of the money itself, but because of what it represented. Missed opportunities. Delayed dreams. A burden that had never needed to be so heavy. Her mother sat back, wiping her face. "I should be angry." Elena looked at her. "Are you?" Her mother was quiet for a long time. "Part of me is. But another part understands how complicated people become when guilt is involved." That sounded like something only years could teach. Adrian looked at Elena. "What happens now?" She hesitated. "I don't know." And that was the truth. For so long, her life had followed a strict rhythm. Work, rest, repeat. There had been no space for uncertainty. But now uncertainty was everywhere. Her mother studied her carefully. "This isn't just about the letter." Elena lowered her eyes. "No. Then what is it?" The question opened something she had been holding back. She looked at both of them. "I think I've been disappearing." The room grew still. She searched for the right words. "I kept telling myself I was helping, that I had to keep going because people needed me. But somewhere along the way, I stopped being a person outside the hospital." Her voice trembled. "I don't remember the last time I asked myself what I wanted." Adrian leaned back slowly. Her mother reached for her hand. "Elena, I missed birthdays, family dinners, ordinary days. I kept saying it was temporary, but it became my whole life." Tears came unexpectedly. "I thought if I gave enough, it would make me worthy of all the sacrifices people made for me." Her mother squeezed her hand. "You never had to earn your worth." Those words landed harder than any others. Because deep down, Elena had believed the opposite for years. That love came through usefulness. That rest had to be deserved. That stepping back meant failing someone. Her mother stood and walked to the window, gathering herself. Then she turned. When your father left for that mission, he told me something I never forgot. Elena listened closely. He said service should never become a hiding place. The words echoed Theodore's warning. Her mother continued. He worried because he knew how easy it was to use responsibility as a shield against personal fear. Elena stared. He saw that in himself? Yes. Her mother smiled sadly. And I see it in you. Silence filled the room. Not uncomfortable, just honest. Adrian finally spoke. So what do you do now? Elena wiped her face. I think I need to change something. Like what? She looked at the trust papers, then at the letter. Maybe I reduce my shifts. Maybe I finally take the leave I've postponed 3 times. Adrian raised an eyebrow. That would be historic. She almost smiled. Maybe I visit my family more than once every month and a half. Also historic. This time she laughed for real. The tension eased. But only slightly. Because everyone understood this was bigger than a schedule adjustment. It was a life adjustment. Her mother returned to the table. What about Theodore? Elena's expression softened. He gave me more than documents. Her mother nodded. Then perhaps you gave him peace. The thought stayed with her. Later that night, after Adrian left and her mother went upstairs, Elena remained at the kitchen table alone. She read her father's letter again. This time slower. Each sentence felt less like a message from the past and more like guidance for the present. When she reached the line about choosing life beyond duty, she closed her eyes. For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine a future not defined entirely by work. A future with room. Room for relationships. For joy. For ordinary mornings. For herself. The next morning, she returned to the hospital before her shift. But not to start rounds. She went directly to administration. The HR manager looked surprised to see her. I'd like to request immediate personal leave, Elena said. The manager blinked. For how long? Elena thought carefully. 2 weeks. Felt enormous. And necessary. Forms were signed. Schedules adjusted. Co-workers informed. Some were shocked. Others quietly relieved that she was finally stepping back. When Elena left the office, she felt strangely light. Not free yet, but moving toward it. She went to room 426 afterward. Theodore was resting, but opened his eyes when she entered. I have news, she said. He smiled faintly. Good or bad? I took leave. His eyebrows lifted. Voluntarily. Yes. That may be the most significant recovery in this building. She laughed, then grew serious. My family knows everything. And they're hurt, grateful, overwhelmed. All reasonable. She nodded. And I'm beginning to understand what this was really about. Theodore studied her. And what is that? She looked at the letter in her hands. My father wasn't just sending us resources. He was trying to stop a pattern. And are you willing to stop it? Elena took a steady breath. Yes. Theodore leaned back, satisfaction in his eyes. Then the promise is complete. She stayed with him a while longer. Not as nurse or patient. Just 2 people connected by one life and its unfinished message. When she left his room, she no longer felt like the same woman who had first entered it. Something had shifted. Not overnight, not perfectly. But enough to know the next chapter of her life would not be lived the old way. And for the first time in years, that thought did not scare her. It gave her hope. Elena's 2 weeks of leave began quietly. At first, the silence felt unnatural. She would wake up early out of habit, reaching for a phone that no longer buzzed with urgent calls. For years, her mornings had started with alerts, schedule changes, and last-minute requests from the hospital. Now there was nothing waiting for her except the slow rise of daylight through her bedroom window. The first morning, she sat at the edge of her bed for a long time without moving. It was unsettling how unfamiliar stillness had become. She made herself breakfast and actually ate it at the table. Not standing. Not rushing. Just sitting. Her mother watched her from across the room with a quiet kind of relief. "You look different," she said softly. "Good different or bad different?" Elena asked. Her mother smiled. "Real different." That word stayed with Elena longer than expected. Real. She had spent so many years in motion that she no longer knew what it meant to be fully present in one place, one moment. By the third day of leave, she found herself outside more often. Walking. Not toward anything specific. Just walking. The air felt sharper than she remembered. The world had continued moving while she had been inside hospital walls, and now she noticed things she had stopped seeing. Children walking to school, neighbors talking over fences, small shops opening with routine patients. Life was not in a hurry. Only she had been. One afternoon, she returned to the hospital. Not for duty, but for closure. The front entrance felt the same, but she did not step inside with the same weight. She had arranged to meet a few colleagues. They greeted her warmly, though with curiosity. News of her sudden leave had spread quickly. "You actually took time off," one nurse said, half joking. Elena smiled. "I surprised myself." They talked briefly about workload, staffing shortages, and how things were still difficult. But Elena noticed something new. She was listening without absorbing it all into herself. She still cared, but it no longer consumed her. Before leaving, she stopped by room 426. Theodore was no longer there. He had been transferred to a quieter care facility 2 days earlier. A small note had been left at the desk for her. "Thank you for finishing what I started." Elena held the paper for a moment. There was no sadness in his absence. Only completion. Outside the hospital, she stood for a long time before heading home. For the first time in years, she did not feel like she was being pulled in 10 directions at once. That evening, Adrian came over with food from a small restaurant they used to visit as teenagers. "You're officially on vacation," he said, placing containers on the table. "Apparently." He looked at her carefully. "How does it feel?" Elena considered the question honestly. "Like I forgot something important, but I can't remember what it was." Adrian nodded slowly. "That might just be withdrawal." She laughed. "From work. From running on empty," he corrected. Her mother joined them at the table, watching Elena closely as she ate. "You're quieter," she said. "I think I'm just slower," Elena replied. "That's not the same thing." Elena knew that now. Over the next days, she began sorting through parts of her life she had ignored for years. Her apartment first. Drawers filled with unopened mail, expired groceries, old hospital notes she had brought home and never reviewed. She cleaned slowly, not as a chore but as something closer to reflection. Each item she let go of felt like shedding weight she had not realized she was carrying. One evening, she found an old photograph tucked inside a book. It was of her as a child, sitting on her father's shoulders. Both were laughing. His expression was bright, unguarded. She stared at it for a long time. For so many years, her memory of him had been shaped by absence and stories. Now, through the letter and Theodore's words, she was beginning to see him differently, not as a distant figure, but as a person who had struggled with the same devotion she now understood too well. She placed the photograph on her desk instead of putting it away. A reminder, not of loss, but of direction. On the 7th day of leave, she received a call from the hospital. A staffing issue, a request for overtime. The voice on the other end was polite, careful. Elena listened without interrupting. When the request ended, there was a pause. "So, can you come in?" This time, Elena did not answer immediately. She looked out the window. The world outside was ordinary. People were living their lives without urgency, without crisis. "I can't today," she said finally. There was surprise on the other end. "You're still on leave?" "Yes." A longer pause. Then, "We really need you." The words used to pull her in instantly. Now they did not. "I know," she said gently. "But I need this time." After the call ended, she sat for a while. Something had changed in her ability to say no. Not from indifference, but from understanding. She could not help others if she continued disappearing herself. That evening, she walked with her mother through a nearby park. The air was cool, the sky fading into soft orange. Her mother spoke quietly. "I used to think your father was unstoppable," she said. Elena glanced at her. "And now, I think he was just very determined to do good, even when it cost him too much." Elena nodded. "I think I understand that better now." Her mother looked at her carefully. "Do you regret your path?" Elena thought about it. "No," she said, "but I regret how much of myself I left behind in it." Her mother reached for her hand. "Then maybe the work ahead is finding her again." That sentence stayed with Elena long after they returned home. On the final day of her leave, she returned to the hospital one last time before deciding her next step. Not as a nurse, not as staff, just as someone who had once given everything to this place. She walked through the corridors slowly. Each sound felt familiar. Monitors beeping, footsteps rushing, soft conversations behind closed doors. It was a world she knew intimately, and yet she now saw it differently. She stopped at the break room where she had once laughed at the broken vending machine. It was still there, still slightly unreliable. She smiled faintly. A young nurse passed by and recognized her. "You're back." "Not yet," Elena said. The nurse looked confused. Elena added gently, "But I might be coming back differently." Outside, she stood in the parking lot where she had once collapsed in exhaustion months ago. The memory no longer felt like a burden, felt like a turning point. Her phone buzzed again. Another request for help. She looked at it for a long moment, then turned it off. Not permanently, just for now. She drove home slowly. When she arrived, her mother was sitting on the porch, waiting. "Decided anything?" she asked. Elena sat beside her. "I think I will go back." Her mother nodded. "But not the same way." "No," Elena said. "Not the same way." She had not yet decided exactly how her work would change. Fewer shifts, more boundaries, perhaps even a different role entirely within healthcare. But she knew one thing clearly now. She would no longer vanish inside it. That night, she placed her father's letter back into its envelope and kept it in a drawer she now opened regularly. Not to revisit pain, but to remember direction. Before sleeping, she stood by her window. The city was quiet. Somewhere out there, hospitals continued their endless rhythm. Lives were still being saved, still being lost, still unfolding in fragile balance. She respected that world deeply. She always had, but she now understood something she had missed for years. She was part of that world, not its entirety, and not its sacrifice. As she closed her eyes, she felt something she had not felt in a long time. Not exhaustion, not urgency, but balance. Not perfect, not permanent, but real enough to begin again. And somewhere in that beginning, Elena Voss finally stopped disappearing.